Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diversity in Gaming. My name is Linda Zayas Palmer, and I am an organized play developer at Paizo. So I work on Pathfinder Society Adventures and Pathfinder Adventure Card Society Adventures.
I'm Lou Pelazar. I'm an editor. I work on everything.
I'm James Case. I'm also an editor, and I also work on pretty much everything.
Hi, I'm Luis Loza. I'm a developer for Pathfinder.
So to get us started off here today, I'd like to start with a question for all of us up here. When we say that the game setting and its characters are diverse, what does that mean to you?
Start for everyone's looking at me. I think what that really means to me is that whoever decides to pick up our books or play our games will see themselves at some point in our content. It has ideally every possible experience and walk of life available inside of the.
I think that's pretty much the same thing. You want as many different things on the page or in your story as you can. It kind of gives everybody an opportunity to be seen, and it also just makes for a more enriching setting with more cool stuff in it.
That you can see characters who you relate to represented in the setting, and that you can build characters that you relate to and see that they are in the world, and they're not just in the world, but they're in the world and they are complex, rich characters who have positions of power and who matter and who impact things and who shape the world.
I mean, you kind of covered it. Pretty much that.
And I do think just to add to that is you ideally also want to have multiple instances of any given identity or thing on the page. I'm from Hawaii. I am not the only person from Hawaii in the world. So it's kind of cool if you have multiple people representing an identity, you can have diversity not just of experiences in a broad form, but within that as well.
Yeah. So, so if we've already touched a bit on what my next question here is about the benefits including diverse characters and stories. So what's your favorite example of diversity in a game that you've played or worked on, or an adventure, whether it's a character or something about the campaign setting? How does that kind of resonate with you?
Well, my favorite thing is kind of boring, I guess. Just the fact that Sela is a lesbian kind of like blew my mind, and I was like, yes, because she's like my favorite iconic. So I was like, it's me. I'm a brown lesbian person. So I was like, that's me.
Sela's so awesome.
I know, I love her so much.
So I know I ask a favorite question when I myself, when I'm asked a favorite question, I'm like, oh gosh, favorites. But one of the things that I was really excited about, and he's one of the characters that's up here on the cycling thing. You'll see a half orc with a husky over there, and that is a venture captain in the Pathfinder Society, and he's a deaf venture captain, and that is his guide dog. So it was really awesome to be able to say, hey, you know what? I love how he's got like the glyph of the open road, the symbol of the Pathfinder Society on the guide dog harness. Yeah. And when you see him in the adventure, it's just like the husky nudges him and it's like, oh yeah, Pathfinders are here. Right. There he is, right over there on the right. Yeah. But in general, though, with the leadership of Pathfinder Society, where it started in the beginning, it was very, straight white man heavy. So we've really been taking a look at that and seeing, okay, what is the representation here? And whenever we're bringing in new people, we're looking to help improve that balance, and also looking at when we have people who are presented as leaders who are acting in a way that is not appropriate, acting in a way that we don't want to see, or we don't want to see being held up or glorified, saying, all right, you know what, let's do an adventure where they're not around anymore, and that's caused some problems because they're off doing this thing, and we need to go and replace them. When we replace them, then we'll do better next time around.
I have not so much as favorite character, but there is a thing that I really like in P2 that we've done. Previously in Pathfinder 1, we had the Madness domain. It came in a lot with our very kind of like Elder Mythos type of stuff, and to just kind of get a better read on this and not to fall into the sort of bad mental health gives you superpowers trope quite so much. We did a lot of rearranging. I believe Liz and Lou were really big on that. Liz Liddell is also the senior editor, and we sort of split it into something called like the nightmare domain, which has touches on a lot of the same themes of like loss of control, weird perception. We also have something we did with the delirium domain where we tried to make it very neutral in how kind of altered states of perception really are not inherently good or bad, they're just a thing. So I really like that we're, you know, trying to move in that direction of, you know, these tropes are cool, they can be accessed in ways that still give you the cool game benefits you want to use with them, but the way we're framing them is a lot, you know, hopefully in a way that doesn't equate, you know, mental health and basically having cool magic powers.
Yeah, and another one that I really appreciate seeing in there too is not just saying, oh well, the villain did this because they're crazy, and we don't need to say anything else. It's like they're a person, right? Don't just throw out you know, don't just throw out a disability or a mental health condition and say, well, that's just the reason for whatever.
Right. Yeah.
I'm always a fan. It's just every single time it comes up, it's just fun and exciting to see. Of any women who are clad in like super cool armor and look like they're ready to kick butt, it's just awesome to see every single time. I have a younger sister who's still pretty young. I mean, she's 16, and just knowing that I'm helping put stuff out there to inspire her and you know, give her what I think are positive role models is just always fun. So like, kick butt women, yes, keep adding more of them.
Yeah. So speaking of some of the things that we like to see, and we did get into this a little bit, but what do you think are some of the biggest pitfalls that people fall into when they're first starting to include diversity into the games?
I think it's very easy to fall into the pit of tokenism. I got one black person and we're done. That's it. You know, let's move on to the next one.
Diversity acquired.
When you can. And it's an ongoing thing. You have to keep working on that kind of stuff. And we want to represent as many people as we can, but also in various different roles. We want both our great, amazing black heroes, but we also want black villains. You know, to just because it can lead into this weird thing where we put the minorities and other marginalized groups into they're always the good guys. They can never be bad guys, and then you know that can almost sometimes be just as bad. So, you know, making sure that they're expansive, active characters in all aspects of the world is pretty important.
Realistic in that sense.
Oh. No, you need to apologize.
I think one of my pet peeves is fetishizing and using stereotypes and stuff to make diverse characters like they kind of don't educate themselves on the culture that they're trying to represent and therefore end up kind of falling flat because they stereotypes or something like that. And it's just like, ooh, you can't say that. Like, that's not good.
Exactly.
You're trying, but let's not do that.
So whenever patterns or flavors are described as exotic.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's my least favorite word.
All right. Speaking of buzzwords not to use, let's see. What other words do we make sure that we never use?
We try not to describe people using food as like color.
So, there's a lot of descriptions of skin tone or hair texture that have, for whatever reason, have kind of been locked in on. Food is a big one. Yeah. You know, describing people as shades of food is also just, I'm like, that's just weird. I'm not like
fetishy. And usually only happens with dark-skinned people and brown people, you know, so it's like, oh no.
I mean, you're not going to crack open an adventure and be like, her mayonnaise-colored skin.
I did see that. The color of raw chicken breasts. I think another thing that is easy to fall into is, especially here, a lot of what we do is fantasy or sci-fi. And this comes up a lot with fantasy specifically in that a lot of the genre roots are rooted in a much earlier sense of racial identity. This comes up a lot with, you can kind of just say the elves did this a lot of the time. And a really good strategy we have for that is always just say the humans instead. if you describe, because like a lot of these fantasy races, like we still use the word race. That's kind of the industry standard word to describe, you know, your elves, your dwarves, that kind of thing. And in many cases, they have been used as a proxy for real world, you know, human racial groups. So in that sense, even though you're talking about, you know, like a magical fairy creature that has lived for hundreds of years, there is a bit of that connection there. And in that sense, you kind of want to treat all of your, you know, sapient creatures that have human level intelligence and agency and moral stuff as basically as if they were humans. So we recently in Adventure Path I was working on, we realized that we had said a character was a gnome, and the art came in and the character was a human, and we weren't going to order more art, so we were like, that's cool, this character can be human, that's fine. So I went through and I was changing all the references from gnome to human, and that led to things like, we're gonna get that human, or it's like, you know, he stared at the human, and I was like, oh, that really does sound very bizarre, doesn't it?
You know how humans are. All humans are the same.
Yeah.
They're also whimsical.
Yeah, well, you know how I feel about whimsical gnomes, so let's just leave that there. And then the other thing is, when talking about national groups, a lot of the times they say like, the Nidalee did this thing. Just sub in the word Americans. You say like, the Americans came in here and did this. You're like, oh, that's maybe a sign that I could phrase this in a slightly different way. So yeah.
Another thing is kind of going back to the food things is animal descriptions for people. Like, complicated one, maybe I should. So the word hermaphroditic is not something that is used for sapient people. Like the intersex community themselves don't like that term at all. And unfortunately, a lot of people just kind of don't think about that. Because, I mean, they just look in the dictionary like, well, the word hermaphroditic is in the dictionary and that's what it means, but it's like not necessarily good, I guess, to put it lightly.
And that's also a good example of a lot of the writing coming from like much earlier usage of terminology,
Right.
because I used to work in medical writing and editing, and like that term has also been disavowed by most of the medical writing, but it's not like most people don't know what the state of the industry is on, you know, on any of these subjects. So getting back to, you know, doing your research when you're trying to represent, or ideally also having, you know, people of that background read through it.
And what you just said there about having people of that background read through is so important, because a lot of times, you know, there's only so much that you can do to research these sort of things. And also, if you are trying to do research about a group that you don't belong to, reading real experiences from people who do belong to that group and hearing from their own voices how they want to be portrayed, how they want to be represented, and what their lives are like.
Right. I very much recommend that over just looking up a word in the dictionary to see if it's okay. Also, the reason I brought up hermaphroditic is because it's used for animals, not sentient people. I guess I should clarify that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's even just true. We have that in just editing, regardless of looking at diversity specifically, but there is only so much that one person can kind of hold in their mind as they're going through that. And so even within the editing pit, you know, we're passing things back and forth because there's 7 or 8 of us now, and so we've all lived very different experiences. And sometimes people bring up something where somebody say, I think that this is a little misogynistic, and I'm just like, I have no context. I have never lived as a woman. No, I'm cisgender. I don't get this. I will pass on this. Somebody else can do it, because I don't feel comfortable making or making those value calls on them.
Yeah. And that's something that within Paizo we will ask each other if we know that there's someone else in the company who represents a group that we ourselves don't represent. And we also hire diversity consultants if none of us are qualified to speak to a certain topic. Or another thing that we do is we look to hire diverse authors. So if we know that a topic is touching on a subject that none of us has experience in, but we can hire someone to write it in the first place who does have that experience, then we can work with them to make sure that the content is going to be appropriately representative. So, we've talked about characters who belong to, you know, a group that could be marginalized. But what about characters who belong to multiple marginalized? Concept of intersectionality. How does that affect what you do in your work?
Everyone looks at me.
Well, you did do this. So.
Yeah. Well, I looked over there, and then they were like.
Lou?
You guys go first.
Luis?
Hello. Well, I mean, it's a lot of the same tactics that you want to follow with just dealing with any kind of group whatsoever. It's just knowing that you have to take additional steps along the way. If you're dealing with, people who are black, cool, you take the steps there. But suddenly, if you're dealing with black women, there's a lot more going on there. And then if you're dealing with black transgender women, then there's so many steps you have to take, and there's so much you have to learn. At that point, you have to realize that it's very, very easy to be way out of your league on things, and that's when speaking with other groups and people who have experience with those backgrounds or working with that kind of stuff is the perfect time to do that. And just because something like that can be tougher to work with does not mean you should avoid working on that. In fact, make sure to be reaching out into those greater depths of intersectionality to get as many people as you can. Just because something is tough does not mean we shouldn't be trying it whatsoever.
And I mean, that just gets back to the idea of sort of diverse in its most dictionary definition. There are lots of different kinds of people out there, and people are more than one thing. So just really by dint of that, that's how you have people who belong to multiple backgrounds. So it's really just the same thing that you've been doing. It's trying to represent as many different kinds of identity and thought and all that.
In terms of editing, I kind of clearly tick a lot of those boxes and have lived a lot of those different experiences. So in editing, I kind of have an eye for it, but not to toot my own horn, I'm still learning. I still don't know that much about the black experience. Even though I'm half black, I was raised by my Filipino mother, so I kind of am still learning all that kind of stuff. So a learning experience, no matter who you are.
Yeah. And that's sort of getting back to Luis's point. I think that it's, while you should be striving to do as best as you can, it is okay to accept that. I think, we're always learning more about it, and that'll just make us better writers.
And in general, for most cases, when we're looking at what we said in the past for Pathfinder canon, we generally keep that consistent going into the future. But one major exception to that is if we find something that's been written in the past that's really problematic, then we will go ahead and revise that. Whether we say no, that's not the thing, that's not what it has ever been, or whether we say that's how it was, but this was a problem, and now we're going to fix it. That's definitely something that we look at. Yeah. But what if you are looking at a published adventure or some kind of gaming material, and you see something that that may have problematic elements, or maybe it's just not diverse? What kinds of strategies can you use when you're approaching that material?
I think if something has already been published and it's out, you can't change it. It's out there. So I think the best thing you can do is then demonstrate in future projects going on that you're willing to grow and to accept more things. Screwed up in the past, it's not great, but if you, I think, make an effort to improve on that in future products, that can help to both show that you're willing to learn and also to just generate those products out there that you put out there. Anyways.
I also think it's important to try to keep people accountable. It's very easy for, even us as publishers to publish something, not realize it's a problem at all, and just keep doing it. And if we don't keep ourselves accountable, first and foremost, but if other people aren't calling things out and letting us know, then there's no way for us to obviously know about these things and fix it. So internally, we try to point out things whenever we can, or if we catch it after the fact, they'll bring it up so we know for the next time. But even within the gaming sphere, if you see other publishers' content that you have issues with, you should let them know. Ideally, in this situation, they realize their mistake, learn from it, and try to fix it. Right. But even on the the micro level of within your own game, if people are doing things that you feel are hurtful, problematic, or anything like that, calling out players is very important. Calling out your GM is very important. Again, it's very possible that this is just blind spots for particular people, but it can't be fixed until they're being brought attention to.
Right.
And I do prefer to, both just personally and sort of, I think, best practice for industries of people you work with, to unless you see like a pattern of like a real pattern of behavior, to just assume that maybe people let something slip by, but basically to not assume malice, unless you've like really seen like a hard evidence for that. Because I think while we do want to hold people accountable, we also want to allow people to have the opportunity to grow. And I think the reality of sort of human psychology is that if you hard call somebody out on it, it can often cause people to or to double down. And like most of the time we're not trying to punish people. We're trying to foster growth and more awareness.
And awareness over accusation.
Exactly. And so I think in that context, I would usually, I think if something came up, I would try to reach out privately first, just because that sort of keeps the information flow a lot more personal, and try to be like, so this is the issue. This is what other people have said. I want to bring this up, and just sort of assume like going forward. I think that also that's why, I mean, this is good for any writing, but any sort of good feedback circuit from between writers and developers and editors is always really good, just to keep everybody constantly learning from each other.
Right.
If something like that is brought up to you, be it at your table or publication, whatever the case might be, just know that whoever brought that up is under no obligation to help you fix that problem. It's already a lot of work to bring up stuff like that. If the person is willing, you can definitely ask. They are free to decline, but it's really up to whoever's issue this is in the first place to kind of do the work on getting that fixed. So just don't expect that if someone calls you out on it, they also will do the work of telling you why it's wrong and what you need to do to fix it next time. So,
right. And also, if you do get called out, like, keep in mind that it was probably pretty challenging for that person to tell you that there was an issue in your game. So making sure that they feel comfortable with you, and that you're not making like this giant production of like, oh my gosh, everybody, this person is super offended when I do this thing. Like you don't want to do that. You want to listen to whatever they want to tell you, whatever they have to say, and then work, and then do your own research on your own time to improve in that area for next time. Do you have something? I just wanted to give you a chance, but yeah. So when you're GMing published adventures too, generally looking at them, like, you can make them more diverse when you run them as well. If there's a guard captain and you notice like, oh, sure, every single one of the people in this guard is a man.
That guard captain can be a woman.
That guard captain can have any gender you want. You can change things around too with those NPCs. Those sorts of things. Like, it's very rare that there's going to be a story that hinges upon a specific part of an NPC's identity, and if it doesn't, then you can change that.
And especially in the context of tabletops, where the story is very like PC driven anyways.
Right.
Like that's actually kind of lucky in that regard, because the narratives are constructed at the table by the people playing them. So the NPCs there are very much, I don't want to say background characters, but they are in some way secondary to them. So a lot of times you can change it, just as how if your table was a joking around group, you would try to run it with a little more humor. If everybody likes it when things are serious, you would turn on some spooky music and turn the lights off and put on your scary GM voice. So it's really very much the same.
That was the list of officially pre-prepared questions that I had here. So do we have questions from Twitch on this now before we continue?
The audience.
Or from the audience.
Hello, audience. All right, actually.
So what would you recommend to authors and artists instead of giving an assignment, and they go, oh, I don't know anyone from that. What would you recommend they do as like a
Before we start with any of these answers, I just want to say that just because we're up here doesn't mean we are the end-all be-all source of
Experts of all things.
everything.
Yeah.
So we'd love to answer your questions and help out, but just know that please continue to try to learn and listen from everyone as best as you can. But I think asking for things like that about freelancing, I mean, just like we try to do internally when it comes to our products, is just learn and understand things as best as you can, as much as you can. Do as much research as possible. If that means reaching out to other people, then so be it. It could also, just mean cracking open books, watching videos, doing as best as you can there.
We live in very interconnected times. I see a lot of times people on social media, on Twitter or something, just being like, hey, I'm looking for authors from this background for a project. If you're interested, hit me up. And I think that it's easier than ever to sort of reach out now. And I think that's a good resource you can have. I think it's also good in many cases to have your flow of information not just be like your one author or your one artist to the developer or producer, but oftentimes creating some sort of network that allows them to talk to each other and expand your network a lot. So maybe the artist doesn't know anybody from that, and maybe the producer doesn't, but maybe one of the other artists on the project does.
Yeah.
And so by creating more of a network here, you multiply your connections, you can get a better chance of reaching out to somebody who might be able to answer those questions.
Yeah, and I mean, you can always ask the person who you're working on the project with. So like at Paizo, you could ask your developer to help you find resources as well.
Yeah.
It's also possible that you may be out of your depth with whatever the project comes for you. If you don't think you are comfortable with doing something like that, or you don't think you'll be able to meet the quality and consideration that is needed for something like that, feel free to turn that down, or say, I don't think I'm the best person for this. If I'm sorry to say, but let's try someone else. It's happened to me. I've assigned work to people who are great freelancers, do great work, and I was told, actually, no, I think you should go with someone else that I know. And if they know someone, that's great. But if not, that's up to you to. If you know someone, you can recommend it. If not, but it's fine if you don't have the experience or the qualifications or even just the confidence to work on something like that.
And if we get feedback like that, don't worry that the person who assigned you that is going to be like, oh no, well they turned that down, I guess we're not going to give them something else. No, that's something that that kind of self-awareness shows a lot of respect. It shows a lot of professionalism, and it really speaks well to you as an author. And that's the kind of thing that we would then talk to each other amongst, like, oh well, I couldn't have this person on this project because they recognized that they weren't confident in their ability to represent this group, but do you have something else that maybe we could get?
Right.
Great. I have another question, or rather a question from Twitch. Dungeon Novice asks, it feels like a bit of divergence, but who is that colorful gnome, and where can I find out more about her? I think they're referring to the one with the fantastic flowery hair.
Her hair is great.
Yeah, I love it.
My favorite art.
I can answer that specifically. So one of our product lines that is newest Second Edition is the Lost Omens World Guides, which kind of cover our campaign setting material, and the second one coming out in October is the Lost Omens Character Guide, where we cover the different ancestries in our world, the core ancestries in our book: humans, goblins, dwarves, elves, things like that, including our gnomes. And one thing that I kind of had a thinking point with our setting was, it's very easy to say, oh, I'm a human who is Varisian, or who is Taldan, or who is Kellish. You have all these different groups of ethnicities within the humans, and then I'm a dwarf.
Yeah,
that's it. I don't have anything like that. So we were trying to work on expanding to an equivalent of ethnicities and different groups for the other ancestries, and our gnomes in particular have different groups here, and that is the art from that book, where you can meet some of the four different groups there.
So we're showing you cool art early because A, we think it's cool, and B, because it it speaks to the point we're trying to make. But I also just want to kind of branch off on that. If, for instance, your non-human races like your elves or your dwarves all represent types of, historically they have been all based off of white humans only. That is sort of saying that white is the default. And you don't really want to say that. You know, there is, if we're realizing these other races and ancestries as being human level in their diversity, we want to show that too. So we have
Black dwarf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like him. We have like the Ekuje, who are our dwarves, who are our elves that live in essentially in the Mwangi, which is our version of Africa, and that kind of thing too. So basically, if they are human level, we want to kind of show diversity in that as well. So short answer though, you're seeing art that we haven't released yet.
Yeah.
Set. It's from a cool book.
Buy that book.
Buy our book.
Luis knows plenty about that book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did literally have someone ask me a few years back, like, is it okay if I play an elf who is black in Galarian? And that moment was
It's
just
your
like,
character. Play whatever you want.
It's eye-opening though.
holy, we have not done something right.
Yes.
Yeah.
We want to avoid people having to question that. We want it to be obvious that, oh yeah, there's black dwarves and there are Middle Eastern elves and all that kind of stuff, or at least people that look that way as well. So.
Yeah. Yes.
So it looks like in gaming, like we're getting better with diversity of like skin tones and stuff like that, but it still seems like there aren't really a lot of characters with like disabilities, and so I was just wondering what y'all have to say about that, or like how it can get better.
That is definitely a thing that we are still working hard to do. I mean, I feel like it's a pretty big blind spot for us at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, it took us, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years in first edition to get wheelchairs. It's like, oh, here's how much it costs to buy a wheelchair. Great. You know, we just didn't have anything like that. So, I mean, part of that, I think a lot of people make the argument that, oh, well, they can't go adventuring because you can't bring a wheelchair or whatever. It's like, no, that's
Whatever.
People
bad.
can
People
fly
are
and
fighting
shoot lasers out of their
dragons,
head.
So it's definitely something that we're working more towards. And another thing is kind of the unseen disabilities that are something that we want to bring about as well. One exciting aspect of the setting that we recently brought in was expanding on one of the deities from Tiansha, Sukio, who is very much a patron of people who have mental health issues and are dealing with that, and you know, people who are what's the word? Neurodivergent. Thank you.
Yes.
So you know, we're trying to work on it. That's really the case with a lot of things. We're trying to work on it.
Yeah.
We would
definitely
need more artwork of that kind of stuff to prove that. So yeah.
That, to pivot off the character that you were describing earlier, has a thing where he's a venture captain, right? So he can do adventuring things. And especially in a world where, you know, in fantasy or science fiction, kind of we have this sort of anything is possible mindset. And we are already doing a make-believe world. We are already suspending our disbelief of the real world when we say, like, and there's dragons and evil magic skeletons. And so if we're making up a make-believe world, why don't we like make one up where it's, you know, better than our world in that sense, you know? So, but as to the specific point of disability, that is a thing that I think has a little bit fallen by the wayside in the past.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
so trying to make progress, that sort of thing. It does just come back to inclusion. A specific thing that comes up a lot in the sort of crunchy tactic stuff we do is, like, we have conditions like blinded or dazzled or like deafened, and we really want to avoid conflating people who have lived with these disabilities for long term and for whom it's a part of their identity with the mechanical condition that happens when, you know, a flashbang goes off in your square.
Right.
There's also stuff you can do with adopting, again, like language from medical sensitivity. About a generation ago, it was seen as compassionate to say the word like the people who suffer from a given condition, because it was seen as being as acknowledging their plight. That has since developed into just saying, don't say people suffer from things, because it implies that their life is pain, which is not what we want to say.
All true.
Yeah, so describing things, we had a character in an upcoming adventure path who had an arm amputated in her childhood due to something about demons, I want to say. And it described her, and the line that we had originally was saying that she has an artificial limb that functions as well as her normal limb or something. And so even in there, the intent is good, right? The intent is saying that she's capable. And so applying some sort of the sensitivity things there. Instead, we just said she has a prosthesis. That's the technical term for the device. And we say that she can use to do, that she can use to what we changed to, but she can, but she can use it to do all of her daily tasks with, and that kind of thing. And so in that way, it also focuses on what she can do, not comparing it to a perceived loss. So I think looking outside of just games for stuff like that, newspaper publishing guidelines are a really good point. Medical guidelines are a really good point, especially for disability. But we are not learning how to do this in the vacuum of gaming. There are other sections of publication that are all also working on these issues, and we can be learning from them.
I think it's also important to not think of disability and mental illness as something that needs to be fixed or something that is a problem, like something that you like, oh, this person, oh, they're deaf, they must want to have a healing spell put on them. It's like, no, that's their culture. They've lived that life. They don't necessarily need to be healed. It's them. It's part of their identity. So it's another thing that we like to keep eyes out for in editing, at least, like making sure that we're not stigmatizing those things and saying that they're bad,
or like that
because
you have to recover from this, you have to fix this or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, personally, I've had quite a few struggles with depression and anxiety in my life, and they've shaped me. And I don't feel like that's something that I have to find some magic button to get rid of. I see that there have been advantages to having these as well as disadvantages. So that's why some of this mental health stuff does resonate for me in particular.
I think just to piggyback on that, the specific Sukio that you brought up, who has a lot of neurodivergent things, I think the focus there is that he focuses on treatment for people who want treatment.
Exactly.
And for people who don't want or feel that they need to change, he's like, cool, we'll go do Moon and Jade stuff, because that's the other stuff he's not doing.
Right.
But I think it mentions that his temples tend to have like quiet spaces for people to be alone, that sort of thing. So in that case, it's also focusing on agency of the person.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that that's a pretty safe place to go to, focusing on what people can do and people pursuing what it is that they want for themselves.
Right.
I think is a pretty safe place to return to.
Yeah. Not necessarily that like it's something that you cannot fix, like if you want to, like I take depression medication, like it's part of my identity, but also I would like to not like, it's normal to do either thing, like what James was saying. So
does anyone have any other questions? Yes.
Hi.
oh
no.
no.
Is that one on?
I'm really good at projecting.
Oh, it's for Twitch.
Just talking to the mic.
Okay. Sure. We can hear you. Yeah.
I hear you.
Hi, I'm Danny.
Hi,
Hi,
Danny.
Danny. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So, I was wondering. So like it's not like I'm wondering, do you topic?
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's okay.
The question was, how are we working as a company to try to expand that network of people to help us out with inclusion and diversity issues?
And to acknowledge that one person does not represent the sum total of any given experience.
I mean, one thing I've even done recently is just put out open calls that, hey, are you a person from such and such background or such and such experience? Come chat with us. We want to hear from you. And it could be that, I put out a thing for Latinx writers recently, writers and developers and whatnot. And every single one of them that I came back was completely different, is a completely unique person. Obviously, yes, look, it's obviously a big background, and even just 30 or so people that got back with me was great. Unfortunately, our schedule for publication makes it so it's kind of hard to have more than one person who is doing sensitivity reading or anything like that at a given time. But we do have several people that we know, hey, this person is a good fit for such and such subject. But we also have other contacts that if we know that maybe this person isn't the best fit, or they tell us they're not the best fit on this, we can work from there. So having a company of 70 odd people means we have a lot of connections that thus have even greater connections to work with.
And I know that the developers have lately done things like created Discords for given projects, and that kind of, at least puts everybody in the same room, so to
it's a
speak.
genius idea. It's been great.
And then stuff like having multiple people from any given background at the company as well helps. I know the editing department is a very queer-heavy department. It's great. And that means that even if we don't all necessarily have the same background in that, like my response as a queer person may be different from somebody else's response as a queer person, that's fine.
Right.
So even if you can't have multiple people working on something at once, you can remember what somebody told you on project number 5, keep a good log of that. And if you have a different person for the same issue or background on project number 6, you can compare that together. We can like grow our knowledge, and if we see that there's like a lot of different answers coming in, that's maybe a signal that this is something that to look at maybe in greater depth, or that may have a more complex range of responses.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if not at the same time, we can try and like layer it.
As someone who doesn't work for a 70-person extremely diverse company, I just recommend Twitter. It's like the best thing ever. When it's like, hey, I need somebody, please help me. That, or just like looking into different guilds around your area, like just Google like I did. I joined a Black Editors Guild, like rock on. So now I can talk to a bunch of other fellow Black editors, which is amazing.
There are also good places to start, are like well-regarded advocacy groups or that kind of thing, because even I do not have the resources of something like the American Association for the Deaf. I forget exactly what the name of the organization is. But we didn't really know how to approach an issue regarding deafness, so we were like, where's a good place to start? And it's like, what about the largest organization in America focused on these issues? I feel like they have a lot of resources on this that I do not have. Let us start there.
Right. And oftentimes at those organizations, they might have here's some good sources that you can go to learn more.
I know that like if you just Google problems, like problematic and then a thing, you can get a wide range of things. You don't know who's written what, especially if it's a field that you're not familiar in, so it can be difficult for you to know like sort of which resources you should value over others and what the prioritization is. Starting with something that has like a reputable organization and then following their recommendations is at least a good first start.
I've also, in doing this work, realized doing the outreach is actually very easy to, like, if you go out there and genuinely are asking for help for stuff like this, people will come and help you on that kind of stuff. So searching for particular types of writers, it's very easy. And actually, I feel as a company, it's probably better for us overall than hoping that someone will come by someday and be like, oh, look, this person is Black or whatever. Now we have a Black author, when I could have just gone online and asked, hey, who are some great authors who might want to work with us? And then it turns out that putting that out there makes it a lot easier for people who hadn't seen this kind of stuff reach out and yeah, it's
ask for things
and you shall receive.
I think we might
have a
time
few
for
more
one
minutes.
Yeah, at least one more. From Twitch, Angel Tarragon asks about transgender representation beyond the iconics.
Yes, actually, we've
too, yeah.
so
Yes.
if you are a fan of Paizo and have been listening to panels and stuff like that for several years, there was a year when we were called out on that specifically, and so Wes Schneider, our former editor-in-chief, was like, oh no, this is a big deal. Since then, we one of our former developers, Crystal Fraser, was very big on pushing towards that, and we've had several characters show up as NPCs in our adventures and adventure paths to work as transgender representation. We have Shardra, our transgender shaman iconic, who is great. We love her. Of course, we always have more spots that we can start filling things in.
As well as a Pathfinder Society scenario by Vanessa Hoskins.
There you go. So we've done, I feel, good work on getting more representation in. There's always more work to be done.
Yeah. Yes.
But there are plenty of spaces you can find such characters. Part of the issue with some of these characters being NPCs and stuff, there are a lot of things that GMs are the only ones that learn this because they're the ones reading the adventures. PC players don't typically read through adventures and find out, oh, turns out Irabeth's wife from Wrath of the Righteous is trans woman. Okay, cool. That doesn't come up unless your GM brings it up. So if you're someone who wants to see that kind of stuff, ask us. Of course, we're going to keep trying to put that in, but also talk to your GM or your fellow players. And it's very easy for a GM to tell you, oh, it turns out, yes, this character is trans, or actually decide that, you know what, this character might be better off as a trans character to just, brighten the world a bit more.
Right. And to toot my own horn again, I try to usually include a non-binary or trans person in things that I write. So I'm like, yes, representation.
That's such like a fake evil tackle. It's like,
even though I'm like doing good things.
it's like
So yeah, there's
Or trying to do good things.
The games are welcoming to people.
Yeah.
But you can always, for any given background character, there are people in the world for whom like being gay or being being Hawaiian or something is a really big part of their identity, and there's people for whom it is just one more thing about them, and it is maybe not the focus of their story. And I think that there is room for both. There are these kinds of people in the world. There should be, there are people like Shardra for whom like it's in her backstory.
Yep.
She's trans, and there are other people who show up as NPC bit characters, and it's like, this is the proprietor of the restaurant. He's trans.
Or it even might be like a micro stat block, neutral, non-binary shop owner. And, stuff like that.
Yeah. So I think just being able to throw those in as well just helps to show diversity, even if you don't have the space to expound on somebody's entire backstory in that sort of length.
When looking at Pathfinder Society scenarios and the balance of characters, we look at the balance in sort of two broad categories of characters. We look at the balance in major characters, who are the big movers and shakers, and also the minor characters as well, to make sure that both of those categories are balanced within themselves, rather than just doing a big overall count, because otherwise you can run into a situation where, say, yes, this scenario is, let's say the scenario we're looking at a balance of gender. This scenario has a balanced gender profile, but then you look at, but
all of the female characers are servants.
All the female characters are servants, and all of the male characters are generals. No, you have not gotten it. You do not really truly have a diverse story in that case, considering the majors and the minors there.
Sort of wandered a little bit from that question, but I hope that answers it.
I'm sorry for the tangent, but
Wrath of the Righteous AP and Hell's Rebels AP for sure that I know. So there's a few plots already. So.
Yeah.
War for the Crown.
There you go. I haven't read that, so hey.
Yep.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we really have for today. So
All right.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming. It's an important topic, and I know it can be. Thanks.